Hi, Ben here and welcome back to the workshop for another Work in Progress Wednesday. And today we're working on a few Nomads. We've got a few Nomads ready to assemble. So I've got one of our chunky Nomads that we actually did a YouTube video on recently. So that's got these real nice striking thick orange liners. And that's going to have one of our 3mm thick ABL blades. That's going to go in there. We've also got a couple of different colour combinations here. This one's got no liners. This is green canvas micarta with a nice red backspacer. And that's going to have a 2.5mm thick RWL 34 blade. And they've also got a multicam here with sort of standard thickness liners in there as well. These nice orange, hunter orange liners and orange backspacer with that multicam. It looks really cool, and that's got an RWL 34 blade as well. Now, while I'm assembling these, I thought we'd cover a little topic. A few people, if they'd had a Nomad a few years ago, sometimes they'd attend a show and they'd come over and they'd say that they'd taken it to pieces for maintenance, for cleaning, and they couldn't get it back together again. So while I'm putting these together, I thought I'd show you the easy way to actually assemble these. Now, you shouldn't necessarily need to take your Nomad to pieces, especially if you've got a stainless blade. You should be able to just clean it while it's all still fitted together. But if you do want to take it to pieces, yeah, there's a few top tips basically. So these are basically the components that the Nomad consists of. You've got the handle body that stays as one piece. You've obviously got the blade, and then you've got these other parts as well. So you're going to have the stainless steel pivot pin that it actually rotates on. So that's a hardened stainless steel pivot pin. Then we've got a torque screw that goes in the other side that actually tightens into the internal thread that's in that pivot pin. And then you're going to have two phosphorus bronze washers. Now, if you lose the washers, it's a real pain because the blade will then rub on the internal body of the knife and it will sound really horrible. So make sure when you are taking it to pieces or putting it back together that you don't lose the washers. Now, the actual body itself, this is what we call our stop pin. That is basically the pin that hits up against the open position and the closed position of the Nomad. And if I show you on this one, you'll see what I mean. So basically when it's shut, this section of the blade is hitting the stop pin, and then when it's open, this part of the blade is hitting the stop pin. So the stop pin is almost as essential as the actual pivot itself. Now, when it comes to actually assembly, I make it so that this is an incredibly tight fit. I actually use an arbor press to push this into the hole that's made, so that doesn't move. Now the other side, the handle, I actually ream that hole so that it's a slightly looser fit. It's a push fit rather than a really tight fit. So that basically allows me to spread the handle scales ever so slightly. So when you've got it to pieces, I normally use a piece of G10. You could use a piece of wood. You could use a screwdriver, but I'd say put a bit of masking tape on the end of the screwdriver so that you don't damage the handle of your Nomad. And all I do is I use that little wedge and I just apply a little bit of pressure, and it opens up that scale, and you can see that there's now a little depression there. So this scale has moved away and that stop pin has basically stayed in place because it's super tight that side, but it's given me an extra little bit of room to work in the body of the actual Nomad itself. Now, it's not essential that you assemble it this way every time, but I personally like to drop the stop pin in so that this rounded dome side is on what we call the presentation side. So that's the side that you see with obviously the logo and things like that. So normally what I do is I get that little pin and I just slide it into the hole, and at this stage you want to make sure that it protrudes only by maybe 1mm, if that. If it comes through too far, you won't be able to get it together. So slide it through so you can just see it, and then what we've got to do is we've got to get one of these phosphorus bronze washers on there. So the other tools that you might need is a pair of tweezers. These work really good, especially when you've got big chunky fingers like I've got. And all I'm doing is I'm sliding that washer in, and I'm looking through that top hole, and I'm lining it up so that I can get that washer over that pivot pin. And I actually use the tweezers itself just to sort of push that down in place. Then, this is where you need an extra hand sometimes. Using gravity as your sort of friend, lay it that way so that the washer stays on that pivot pin, and then slide the blade in, and I sometimes pinch the washer down with the blade itself, and you might need to just pull that pivot pin out ever so slightly, if it's gone in too far. And you can see now that the blade is allowed to go over that pivot pin, and then I locate it so I can see through that hole, and then I'm just going to push the pivot pin just ever so slightly further through. So now what you can see, look, is we've got the pivot pin almost through, we've got that one phosphorus bronze washer that side of the blade. Now we need to get another one in this side of the blade. So while it's all sort of together, you might need to use your little wedge again just to open it up to make sure that there's that gap there. We're going to get a second little washer, and we're going to slide it in that gap on that side of the blade, and we're going to push it through. I sometimes use the other end of the tweezers just to sort of push that through, and then using the tweezers again we can just locate that washer on this side of the pivot pin, just like so. And then what you should be able to do is just using your finger just push the pivot pin the rest of the way through. Sometimes if you just waggle the blades ever so slightly, it will help it all sort of go together. And then what we can do is we can get our torque screw that goes from this side of the blade, drop that in, and you're going to need a torque spanner. So this is a T9 or a T10 torque screw. This is in a really handy little driver that somebody made for me, and I can just slowly start to tighten that up. Normally what I do is I spin it backwards to start with to make sure that it engages in the thread, so that if you try and just tighten it sometimes straight away, you'll find that it will cross thread. So wind it backwards to start with, make sure that it's all located, and then start to tighten it. And what you'll probably find is as you start to tighten it, it will actually pull all of it in place. So it starts to pull that pivot pin further into the body, it starts to close up that gap, and you basically want to tighten this so that the blade isn't floppy. See how that's just swinging in free air and that's too loose? So you keep tightening it until you end up with that friction that you want. So you don't want it so that it's too floppy. I actually like it so that you physically have to close the blade and you physically have to open the blade. Even that is still feeling just a little bit loose. So you can just tweak it to your personal preference really. But we've designed these Nomads that even if you really do tighten that totally fully tight, that pivot pin, it still won't lock the blade. You'll still be able to close it and open it, because obviously we don't want to make it so that it actually gets classed as a fixed blade. So that's feeling good now. So I'll just make sure that that's working nicely. You can check that you've got it centered. You can adjust the tension again just to try and tweak the blade a little bit. But because we've got those two washers, one either side of the blade, you won't hear any graunching. You shouldn't hear any noise of the blade rubbing on the body. If it's got dirt or debris in the actual handle itself, before you assemble it, make sure that you get an air line or a bit of compressed air and just clean out any debris, and you'll find that that'll work nicely for you. So that one's fitted together nicely, and you can see that this tang of the knife, this little spur on the back side of the knife, when it's fully open, it sits nice into the handle so that when you're actually using it, there's no fear of that blade folding on your fingers. And once I've assembled it like that, I would normally just give it a little spray of WD-40. That will clean up the handle material, give it a little bit of lubricant in the actual pivot area of the Nomad itself, and it will just protect the blade a little bit as well. So that's another one of our little Nomads assembled. A little bit fiddly, but once you've done a few, you get the hang of it. So hopefully that will help any of you that will either want to maintain your Nomad, or if you have dismantled it and you're in a bit of a dilemma of how to actually put it back together again, hopefully that will give you a few top tips. And if you have lost your washers and you need some more, just contact me and I should be able to send you some spare washers. I used to use nylon washers in the very early days, but the phosphorus bronze ones are even better and a little bit easier to get in there as well. So hope that helps, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to just drop it in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you next week for another Work in Progress Wednesday. Thanks for watching.